Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We're really excited to have you for this really interesting session. And I have to say, I do have quite a secret passion for English language learning. So welcome to the Migration Summit. We welcome you to the Migration Summit. The Migration Summit 2022, organized by MIT Refugee Action Hub, NAMO, Karam Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab, is a month-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, nonprofits, and NGOs, social enterprises, foundations, philanthropists, researchers, policymakers around key challenges and opportunities for refugees and migrant communities. This year, we're exploring the theme of education and workforce development and displacement through virtual events throughout the entire month, and hosted by participating partners around the world. Today, I'm really excited to welcome the team from Mosaik. The aim of this session is to open the approach to critique and stimulate ideas and sharing experiences of effective and meaningful language learning in refugee contexts. They will talk about the present state of English language teaching in refugee contexts, including Mosaik's own approach at decolonizing education and areas for improvement, and address the questions of how can we provide English language learning support, one of the greatest barriers refugees currently face accessing higher education, in a way that is contextually relevant and meaningful for refugees. This session, I'm really excited to welcome our three guests. We have Mickey, who manages the English program at Mosaik Education. And she's been with Mosaik since the founding, has been working with the refugee education space since completing her master's degree in international education policy at Harvard Graduate School. Ahmed Osman is a project manager and volunteer with Mosaik as an English language teacher, currently pursuing his bachelor's degree at Xavier University. He's calling in from Jordan. And finally, Scott is a teacher and teacher trainer and writer, and has been working in the English language space for a very long time, and he is calling in from Spain. So welcome. I'm really excited by this conversation we're about to have today. So over to you guys.
Great, thank you so much for the introductions, Lorraine. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So thanks, Lorraine. So as Lorraine said, we're going to speak about our how we've used dialogue-driven pedagogy in our Mosaik English classes. And also at the kind of second half of the session, we're going to ask for you guys to draw from your experiences, whether in English language learning or elsewhere, to provide some ideas and perspectives on alternative methods for making ELT effective and contextually relevant and engaging for refugees. So just to provide some background on Mosaik Education. So Mosaik, we support refugees to access university by designing alongside the refugee community and leveraging technology. Currently, our programs mainly focus on language learning and academic guidance, and we currently work in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Just for some brief regional context, there are over 8 million refugees across Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. 65% are Syrian. Over 12 million refugees in host communities are in need of assistance, all in middle-income countries, and the majority of refugees are in urban contexts rather than camps. As it stands, 5% of refugee youth attend university, whilst the global enrollment average is 40%. University lets refugees contribute to local economies, increases their self-sufficiency, and helps reconstruct the country once they return. These are some of the barriers that refugees face in accessing university. We're primarily focused on, in today's session, English language teaching. So in our experience at Mosaik, so we have found that there are a significant number of English language learning providers in the region, but many of the delivery and materials are still teacher-centric and Western-centric, with US and UK origins transplanted into crisis contexts without much adaptation. which leads us to the problem statement. How can we provide English language learning support, one of the greatest barriers refugees currently face in accessing higher education, in a way that is contextually relevant and meaningful for refugees? This is some of the members of our team that works on our English programs. As Lorraine mentioned, we have myself, Ahmed, who is a Mosaik English teacher, former student of this dialogue-driven approach, and now critical in helping us iterate on the English language curriculum and design. And then we have Scott, our resident English language learning expert and advisor to the Mosaik English program. So to address the problem statement, we arrived at DOGME, this dialogue-driven approach. We started delivering these dialogue-driven courses where facilitators are trained to teach emergent language from materials and topics that are brought in from the students. So the first original course, which was at the time primarily refugees from Sudan and Somalia, they would bring in materials, whether it's a news article from Sudan or a piece on a local hero in Somalia. And these would be the materials, learning materials for the class. So our classes are now taught by refugees who were students of that original class, like Ahmed. And the aim of these classes in this approach was to kind of shift the power dynamics of the classroom with student-driven dialogue, student-driven materials, and also this sort of negotiated syllabus. But I will now turn it over to Ahmed to speak a bit more about his reflections, both as a teacher and a student.
Hello everyone, I'm Ahmed calling from Amman, Jordan, and it has been an amazing day for us here at daytime. And I would like to reflect on how we start the Mosaik English classes in Amman. And first of all, here in Amman, like there is few opportunity for the refugees to go for community centers. But when we met Mr. Ben, Frankie, so we were already having like kind of a conversation club started by the group of colleagues, students. And we had no idea how to manage our conversation club. But when we met with Frankie and he provided us some kind of tips how to lead the conversations, then we began to take the turn as a group to post on the WhatsApp group the materials that we wanted to learn more about it, mostly like cultural events and that relevant for our cultures. And so Frankie started like give us like the idea of how we can organize and to help ourselves. So then the Mosaik team provided some kind of materials that we started with the conversation classes. Then it began, Frank began like regularly every week to come and observe and give us like feedback how we like take them as colleagues to lead our conversation class. Then, so the idea, Mosaik adapted this conversation club to the Mosaik English class with the help of Frankie. Then it began like the formal class of English. And I was one of the students that now I am like one of the Mosaik teacher in Amman here in Jordan. And also we had the amazing opportunity, which is dogma training, also helped teachers like me to teach during the COVID-19. And the training of dogma enabling us and give us the confidence to start like teaching online, even though like some of us, we had no experience teaching online, but with the training from Mr. Scott, that helped us to teach. And some of our students, they got scholarship, now they are studying abroad, and the other, they are continuing in the local college or universities. And now the Mosaik English program has become one of the major program in Amman. And in spite of a few opportunities, but actually we were able to teach different refugees, not just only from Sudan or Somalia, but from Syria, from Jordan, and from other countries as well, like Iraq. And the last courses that we taught in the online, mostly refugees from Syria. Most of them, they were based on refugees camp outside Amman. And with the technology, we were able to reach them, to teach them. And some of them with the Mosiak program, English, they were able to come inside the Amman and they applied for the universities. And now they start like also giving other guidelines for the how to choose or to choose or to get the best universities or the colleges. Also is important for the refugees because most of the refugees, they are passionate. They want to study, but they have no idea. They don't know from where to start, or they don't know where to ask. But we also got the Facebook groups, also led by some of the Mosiak team, and also will provide some guidance workshop for the students. These activities are still, we hold it for now, but we are hoping and aiming soon to start after Ramadan soon, our English program.
Great, thank you, Ahmed. I'll hand it over now to Scott to give his view on all of that.
Thank you, Mickey, and thank you, the organizers of this event, for making this possible to share with you what we've been doing. And what Ahmed has done has painted the picture to the point where I was brought in as a kind of consultant, pedagogical advisor, whatever you want to call it. So my credentials for this role were that I am associated with a kind of approach which has already been mentioned a number of times, called dogma, which was in fact an approach to teaching English as a second language, which evolved as a kind of a strong form, if you like, of communicative language teaching, which was trying to, in a sense, reorient pedagogy towards a more communicative approach, and one which was not dependent on a great many resources or materials. Because it was my feeling at the time that language teaching, and a lot of teaching, in fact, had become rather over-resourced at the expense of the kind of real communication that is created in the classroom, and which for language learning would seem to be essential, and arguably for any kind of learning, which is that it be deep dialogic, that there be a reciprocal relationship between the people in the room, and that there be a not just a one-way flow, if you like, or transmission of knowledge from teacher to learners, but it would be more jointly constructed. So because of this background of mine, I was asked by Mosaik to come in and advise on the project with a view to working with the teachers involved to train them in this kind of so-called dogma approach. And Frankie, who Ahmed just mentioned, who was the teacher on the ground in Amman working with the British Council at the time, was very much a devotee of this approach. And he was the one who put forward my name and suggested that I be brought in to advise. And so I came in at the point where there was the pandemic was just about to start. So all plans to do any training, either on site or online, were had to be radically adjusted to take into account that not only were teachers teaching online, but they were not teaching classes online, they were teaching individuals at the same time. But I mean, the individuals were distributed over space, and also were working, most of them with very limited access to technology and in conditions which were not ideal. So what we did was we designed a program, a training program for the teachers, most of whom are themselves volunteers and many of whom hadn't had a great deal of experience, as Ahmed reminded us. What we were hoping to do was build on this experience of these face-to-face classes that Ahmed was part of, and use the expertise of people like Ahmed, who had been through the process as students and then had, in a sense, morphed into becoming teachers, to use that experience to build a training course which was essentially extremely practice-oriented. And I mean, I think one of the things that I'm committed to as a teacher trainer is to make practice the starting point of the training cycle and let the theoretical side, the principles, if you like, sort of evolve or emerge. And this is, in fact, is very consistent with this dogma approach to teaching, which, as Mickey pointed out, is very much conversation driven, that it's dialogic, with this kind of, as I said, this symmetrical relationship between teachers and learners. And also the language that is the focus of the curriculum, if you like, is the language that emerges out of the needs, interests, desires, hopes of the learners in the classroom. And from that point of view, it's important that, as Mickey said, that they contribute to the design of the curriculum. They contribute to the content of the lessons through their own lived experiences, through the materials that they want to bring into the classrooms. So in a sense, as Ahmed mentioned, that, you know, it started, the germ of the idea started with these conversation clubs. And the conversation clubs, in a sense, migrated into this methodology, which we call, for historical reasons, which I won't go into, dogma or teaching unplugged. In fact, in 2009, I co-wrote a book called Teaching Unplugged, which was a practical guide to these kinds of principles. So if we can go to the next slide, Mickey, I'm not sure. Yes. So this was the design. We had several iterations of this training course. Both extensive in the sense of one session per week, and this is the intensive version, which occurred over the space of a weekend with 6 sessions, 3 on day 1, the following 3 on the second day. And the focus was very much, as you can see here, on activities, on practical activities that teachers could do in the classroom, or, as the case was at the time, in online, using platforms like Zoom, for example. So you can see then there's a list of activity types, and all these activity types, there's nothing original about them. They are standard activity types that are part of most communicative teachers' repertoire: guessing games, chats, discussions, show and tell kind of things, presentation, collaborative writing. And then we did devote a couple of sessions to how teachers could assess the needs or analyze the needs of their learners through surveys, and how they could design basic lessons, as you see in session 6. And then at the same time, we were demonstrating these activities. We were also demonstrating certain, what we've called here, interaction types, things that teachers do, particularly language teachers, to facilitate language learning, which in combination, what we might call generally are interactions that scaffold the learning process. So modeling language, eliciting questions, giving feedback, checking understanding, focusing on form, that is, focusing on the formal features of the language, etc. And so these sessions were very, as I say, practice oriented. So they started off with a demonstration of the activity type, which was the focus of the day. Teachers then online would go into breakout rooms, practice these activities on each other, discuss them, talk about how they would adapt them to their particular context. And as I say, this iteration that I'm showing you here was the course spread over an intensive weekend. But very importantly, then we followed up with weekly sessions. So Mickey, if you can go to the next slide, which we called skill building sessions. So what we were hoping to do here was to build on the experience that the teachers are having now that they were back in the classroom, admittedly the online classroom, and able to try out some of these techniques. So each skill building session lasted an hour or so. They were videoed, so people who couldn't attend could watch them. And they started off with what we call an open house. An open house was simply where teachers volunteered to report on what they'd been doing since we last met. So these are happening over a week, happening weekly. So they have been, most of them were in the classroom, the online classroom, during the process of the school building session. So they're able to report, ask questions, share materials, as well as maintain contact with each other through WhatsApp, through a WhatsApp group. And there was a Moodle platform where the materials of the training course that I've just showed you were available, discussion forums where they were invited to contribute, etc. So it was a kind of a multi-pronged approach to the training program. Then, during the skill building sessions, there were input sessions, as you see in part 2 of each session, which is where we start to extrapolate the principles. So as I said before, the starting point was practice, actual practical activities that teachers could do in the classroom. And out of that, we kind of, as I say, extrapolated these general principles of dogma ELT, this low materials, low resource, dialogic approach, and then how the teaching of grammar, vocabulary, and language skills might be expedited using this approach. And in some ways, I have to say that this was probably the most interesting part of the course for me, because this is where the teachers were able to report on what they'd actually been doing in the classroom, and also it allowed us to diagnose their emergent needs, which were various, because we, as Ahmed said, we had teachers teaching in lots of different contexts and teaching different age groups, teaching different within different curricula, and it was a challenge to try and sort of homogenize these diverse needs. But I think the feedback suggested that on the whole, the approach was successful. And I mean, I wouldn't say it was, I mean, that it doesn't need further changes and adaptations. But I think in terms of what we were able to do, given the extreme constraints we were working under, I think on the whole, the feedback at least suggested that the teachers were getting something out of this. So I think I might maybe return to Ahmed again and ask him, since he was involved in both stages of this process, both in the initial stage, well, as a student, then as a teacher in face-to-face classes, and then as a teacher on the online classes, if he, Ahmed, would you like to comment on how you felt the course helped you in your practical day-to-day teaching?
That is a great question. So, yeah, as the teachers, like, we are motivated to give back what we have learned from Frankie, from the dogma training. So that is why it was like, we were like passionate to give it back what we have learned. And when we put it in practicals, the training that we gained, put it in practical, it was in the beginning, as you mentioned, because we have like the different group of students, and we had some time to integrate Arabic with English and to be flexible as refugees. So we built an environment that like to attract the students. They wanted to join the classes, and also asking for more time for activities, as the philosophy of the dogma methodology, it is like more concentrate on the conversational, which is very important, because like not all the students, they wanted to go to the university. Some of them, they want English for working. So we had to balance this kind of two combinations. Like sometimes we give like to the private feedback, and we had to send to the like individuals resources, those like especially they are aiming for the higher educations, and also like special sessions that we tell the students. And because like, I was one of the students, that is why like I will experience how it will impact on the students' life. That is like made us as a teachers to do our best and to make the classes more engaging and more like participated. Even like some of them, they were just afraid to speak English, but the also Mosaik class, they also like they think the fear of speaking English. The title written like this, so we encourage our like brothers, sisters, colleagues to just speak, and from the speaking they get motivated. So they started like to learning more. Like when we send their like extra resources on the WhatsApp group, they start like learning more, and they also sharing the resources that relevant for them. They want to learn about them. For instance, like Eid, like Ramadan, or like even like we integrated like the social issues topics, like early marriage. We were like discussing like these big topics, like, and it for some of the students it's kind of cultural norms for them, like, but we're not like openly to speak about these kind of topics, because like as like the Middle East culture, like especially in the first classes, like it wasn't pre-experience for like mixing groups, men and women, let's say. And but with our like the efforts of the teachers, also with the diverse of the topics, like allow the students to participate and engage. So there is a lot of interesting stories, but I just don't want to take a lot of time. If you guys have any question, I would be happy to answer.
Yeah, actually, Mickey, can you just go back to that slide?
Sure.
Since Ahmed touched on a number of important key issues here, and I think I just want to reiterate the importance of motivation and agency, and how for all students, whatever their situation, whether they're displaced people or not, this is obviously a key factor in their educational and the enjoyment of the educational experience, is the degree of agency that they have. And but I think particularly with refugee students, the idea that they should their own lives and experiences and languages should be acknowledged and brought into the classroom, rather than being herded, if you like, down a kind of syllabus or a curriculum which has been imposed from somewhere else. So I think what we were trying to do, I mean, Mickey mentioned at the very beginning, talking about shifting the power dynamic so that the learners themselves and the teachers of these learners who come from similar backgrounds can have a degree of agency over the curriculum and the way that the lessons are handled. And this can only be good in terms of their motivation and their self-esteem, which is, has probably taken some knocks. So, I mean, there are problems, though, and I think we can address these shortly with an approach which is essentially dialogic and conversation driven, because you're probably wondering, well, yes, but what about the students who have got their eye on getting into tertiary education and need a certain degree of formal training in the language? And we'll come to that in a second, how we're attempting to kind of square that particular circle. So maintain the agency and the motivation through this dialogical conversational pedagogy, where the learners have some control over the content of the lessons, at the same time supply meet their particular linguistic needs, given that, as Ahmed said, a lot of them or suggested that they don't share the same needs necessarily. Some want to go into higher education, some want to get into work, and so on. But you can see here, we did survey regularly the teachers on these courses, and they felt that there had been an increase in motivation and participation on the part of their students, and that the students, even on our online courses, were attending more regularly than they had before. So, Mickey, I'll hand it back to you. Lorraine's just posted, I think, an important question regard to how we address the academic writing students who want access to higher education. So I think that's something we can start to look at. But I'll hand the agenda back to you, Mickey, because I know that you have, these questions and comments, for example, that you would like us to deal with.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think generally, as far as the agenda, I think this could be a good time to just open it up to any questions or comments that any of you guys might have, whether related to our approach or any sort of experiences that you would want to share that relate to how, say, you might have solved for, or you might solve for a similar problem statement. I see we have some hands and some questions in the chat. I mean, Scott, since you've mentioned Lorraine's question already, do you want us to tackle that one first?
About academic writing. Yes, I mean, in a sense, the academic writing is one aspect of the whole academic curriculum that we are working hard to address. And this is where it is a bit of a juggling act, because on the one hand, how do you provide an education or a language education which is, in a sense, I wouldn't say unstructured, but is less formally structured than what many students will be probably used to. That is to say, working through a typically grammatical syllabus, doing mainly reading and writing activities rather than speaking and listening activities, etc. The sort of syllabus or curricula that many of the students have come from, and which we were trying to, in a sense, not subvert, but provide a motivating alternative to. How do you then square that circle, provide those who do want to get into tertiary education with a curriculum which facilitates that trajectory. And I think this is something we're working on, providing the teachers with resources so that they identify the need in their particular classes for, as you said, Lorraine, for example, academic writing, then suggestions of ways that they could integrate the teaching of academic writing into this less tightly structured approach. So we're developing what we're calling recipe cards. Is this the time to mention this, Mickey?
Yeah, sure. I can also help speak to the recipe cards a bit if you'd like.
Well, I'll hand it over to you in a second. I think the idea with the recipe cards was to provide teachers with not with a syllabus as such that they were, which might constrain them and be not necessarily in interest of their teachers, but ideas for lessons following the practical approach that I was explaining, which was the basis of our training course, where each session began with a practical activity, continuing that same approach, but making some of those practical activities the teaching of academic writing. So here are some ideas that you could start working with, say, intermediate level students on starting to develop their academic writing skills, as well as their academic speaking skills and their listening skills, etc., through, for example, doing tasks which they can do collaboratively, which they can do as homework tasks, which they can upload into whatever the platforms we're using, where they can get feedback from the teacher, but possibly targeted at areas of their own particular interest. So whatever their academic, field is, that they could start producing small texts initially, which can be then reworked collaboratively and with the help of the teacher as they build up incrementally their skills in academic writing. So the idea of the recipe cards would be to provide practical ideas to the teachers of how to develop this process, whether it be academic writing, academic reading, whether it be conversation, etc. Mickey, do you want to talk a little bit more about how we're developing these recipe cards?
Yeah, sure. So I think the academic writing question is a good one because it comes to this broader challenge that we have been working on trying to tackle, especially in the past few months or so, and it's around this structure and support component. So since DOGME is such an open-ended pedagogy, and again, it's this negotiated syllabus where teachers try to understand the students' needs and then bring in the learning based on emergent language or student topics that are brought in. But we did identify, especially with workshopping with teachers like Ahmed, that there was this need for structure or for kind of adding materials that might have tension with this open pedagogy, but might need to add some sort of measures of progress or lesson plans that look more traditional, but are still DOGME in spirit. And so we have been working on what we're calling recipe cards. So the idea is that there would be these sort of recipe cards that teachers can use, and the topics they would still be based on what the students are showing as needs or what the students' learning goals are, but the teachers would be able to navigate and pick and choose from these recipe cards that have sort of this more guidance for the teachers, whether it's different activities that they can choose from that are still dialogue-driven activities. But the idea is that these recipe cards could also point to external resources that do bring in this sort of academic writing or more vocab focused or grammar focused and whatnot, and then navigate through the recipe cards and these external resources to still provide synchronous dialogue-driven activities and then asynchronous more academic sort of work. Other questions? Or Scott, anything you wanted to add to my?
No, I'm done, and I'm conscious of the time.
Yes.
Mutombo had his hand up. Mutombo, do you still have a question or comment?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
She answered the question. I just wanted to ask on the challenges that you guys were facing during the program, like what most of the challenges you face, and how do you approach those challenges?
Yeah, I think we have, I hope we've answered to a certain extent. I think the biggest challenge is this kind of balancing act of providing what Mickey was calling the more sort of open-ended process, negotiated approach, at the same time, the more structured, focused education that is needed. And Blaine says, well, that actually, I'll just go back before Melissa asked, do students receive diagnostic feedback from the assessments as well, or other results of the diagnostics only for the teachers? No, I mean, I think the whole principle, one of the principles underlying this approach, that there are no secrets, that the learners are involved, particularly if they're adults or young adults, that they're involved just as much, because if they're going to be designing or having some say in the content and the design of the curriculum, then they also need to know, they need to have clear messages about how well they're doing, what needs to be done, how to meet their particular needs, etc. And this can be done through lots of different ways, with more formal ways like formal testing, but also through individual tutoring and counseling, and that would seem to be a very important part of the process. I'm just scrolling back.
Sure. Maybe, Scott, while you scroll, Ahmed, do you have anything that you want to add to either challenges or feedback with students?
Yes, sure. We give like individual feedbacks and the collective feedbacks always. And because as I mentioned earlier, so we had like mixed students for the academic and for the just for work experience. So, and like I would like to also add more about the how would we provide for the writing skill, as one of the participants asking. So we would like use the British Council syllables and links from the websites, integrate with the dogma that we share, like the video, how to write academic writing. And also when we just motivate the students to write, and we will give the feedback. And also like some individual sessions also that will help for the improve. And also we give the idea, how the process of writing for the students. Like always we more carefully or like what student needs, not what we want to teach them. So like the philosophy or philosophy of the dogma is based on the relevant language for students, what they want to learn. So for instance, like those want to learn about the sport, we will bring the material about the sport. That is what like make the Mosaic education unique, different from the others. Like as Scott mentioned it, like so like it's not like the traditional teaching. Like it used to be like textbooks, and somebody doesn't know about the London and bringing like the pictures or some stuff from the London. So it means like it doesn't make sense for the students here in Middle East. So we teach like relevant language for the students, what they want to learn. So they're passionate. That is why encourage the students get more encouraged. They want to learn more about their cultures, more about their, like, for instance, for those aiming to improve their writing skills, they are asking more about the material for writings. Also, we were sharing like continuously on our WhatsApp groups. And this is like, we were not like focus on one side. We were like concentrated on the 4 skills, like writing, speaking, and reading, and listening as well.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah. Blaine asked, how much time is taken for students to reach their targeted goals? I mean, that's a good question. And I think, it's, in a sense, it's still early days, and you do need, we do need to research over the longer time how much progress learners are making, particularly compared to learners in more traditional contexts. This is an ongoing research kind of need on our part. But I think if you think in terms of shorter term goals rather than long-term goals, I think that's easier to measure. And I think, I mean, it's not easy. It's difficult to measure any kind of progress in language learning because it's not a very linear, and it can often be quite a slow process. But using descriptors of, for example, like the Common European Framework, which has devised quite comprehensive descriptors of progress at different levels, beginners, intermediate, advanced, etc., in different competences like speaking, reading, listening, etc. These provide useful benchmarks for both teachers and students to monitor their own progress in terms of can-do statements. So again, this is something that in a dogma approach, we would encourage learners to do themselves, to take some responsibility, saying, what is it that I can now do that I couldn't do before? What speaking skills have I acquired, etc. And this can be done incrementally over the course of a semester or a year or whatever, as students work towards their longer term goals. Mickey, do you have anything else?
Thanks, Scott. No, I was just going to say, I think bringing up the Common European Framework is a good segue for us to, we don't have quite enough time to break out into breakout rooms and discuss each of these 3 questions, but we can kind of leave the last 10 minutes either to additional questions that people may have, or these are the 3 that we originally wanted to pose to you guys that are both based on challenges that we've had, that some of which we've already mentioned, or also just interest in learning other ways that people try to maybe also have a different non-Western centric classroom or student-centered classroom, or other ideas that we might be able to bring into our own program. So yeah, again, open to general questions you might have, or if you have ideas that are related to this. As Scott brought up, for example, this Common European Framework related to question number 2, that's been something that's been interesting for us to try to think about how we might align this learner-driven and dialogue-driven pedagogy with these sort of fixed international and national curricula. So yeah, would love any of your guys' thoughts on these topics.
I think I probably have another question to make it even more complicated.
Sure.
So again, thinking of university and students having to do an IELTS or TOEFL, which again is kind of the opposite of what you're trying to decolonize the teaching of English. How do you then reconcile students having to do these international exams, which are very, very much set within the British context, certainly the IELTS is? How do you reconcile that with the pedagogy in which you employ?
Yeah, I mean, that really does nail it. I think you're absolutely right. And it's there's no escape from the need for students to achieve good results in IELTS, etc. This is the fact of life. And I think one way to kind of try to reconcile our approach with these more formal but high stakes exams is to think in terms of a kind of 2-track program where we try to balance this more formal traditional preparation for exams like IELTS with the kinds of more fluency focused learner-centered approach that we've been advocating in our dogma classes. And they're not incompatible. And it's perfectly conceivable to imagine a student doing both tracks, as it were, concurrently. So they're working on the one hand on preparation for IELTS, but at the same time they're working in developing their fluency skills, etc., which will feed in at some point into their success in IELTS too, because I mean, it's not just a written exam, they are tested on their spoken language. So, but I think, yeah, it would be unrealistic to think that to try and think that we could deal with the very, very formal structured demands of something like IELTS through this more flexible learner-centered dogma approach. But it seems to me that it's perfectly compatible. If somebody's studying, say, 5 hours or 10 hours a week, that half the time be spent on exam preparation, where they're getting focused feedback from their teacher and their colleagues, their classmates. At the same time, they're having 5 hours doing these more open-ended, learner-centered, collaborative, fluency-based activities.
Yeah, and just to add,
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add to Scott's mention of this 2 tracks and their compatibility. I think it also comes to these recipe cards and how partnerships might work. It could be that either just the recipe cards become something that we could partner with an organization who teaches these more structured IELTS courses, and those level-specific external resources that I showed in this slide could be more related to IELTS. So it's kind of more how the pieces of the puzzle might work to complement each other.
Yes.
Lisa? Oh, sorry, Ahmed, you were talking, sorry.
Yes, I will add. So I will give you like 2 examples about the IELTS. So I remember like 2 students from our students, like, so they were aiming to get the IELTS exam. And what we would do, we just like share the resources from the British Council resources, and also we have them like individual session with them until they get the IELTS, the point that like they send them to the university. Now they are studying in Canada. So like us, like the teachers, we know like more what the student need. And even like for the speaking practice, I remember one of them like sometimes like sending me like the voice messages like about a specific topic. I just give her like the feedbacks, and also sharing the speaking IELTS preparation from the YouTube, like Googling from the IELTS, also from the British Council resources, and sending to her. Also, she will see the feedback and imitate what I have shared. Then will come back to me like we like tried. So since we didn't have like fix it syllables or the curriculum, so we were like the diverse. We were trying our best to help our students as we could. I hope this answers the question.
These are good. Elisa, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I wanted to speak to what you mentioned, sort of what could be like the tension between more traditional methods of learning and your pedagogy. And it really seems like, as a person who has sort of learned 4 languages, but not fully, that it's really, as you said, important for students to build the self-confidence as they approach a language learning. And I think for that, you know, these speaking, something to start with writing and reading. And it seems that, you know, as students develop this fluency through speaking and listening, that then you can add those exercises to, you know, to prepare them for IELTS. But if you don't have that initial confidence that, you know, this is a language I can sort of practice, and I have the sort of you know, the capacity to do so, then it's really, really, really difficult. And just to bring up like another methodology, I think the Michael Thomas method, or Michael Thomas method, that sort of uses basically audio learning, where you're sort of learning the sort of sentence structures that you would utilize, right? You're learning sentences, how, for example, you know, in the English language, what are the main sentence structures, so that then you can, as you develop more vocabulary, you can just fill in those sentence structures. I think that's also very useful for people who are, you know, approaching the English language or any language as beginners. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, Elsa. I think that even in the best circumstances, language learning is often a very soul-destroying and humiliating, or can be, process, particularly for adults, because it involves a degree of infantilization, if you like, going back, becoming a child again, with all the anxieties associated with that. And I think, but for refugees, this is exacerbated by their particular circumstances. And so you're absolutely right, I think, to provide learners a solid base of confidence building, acknowledging their own identities, experiences, personalities, etc., and inviting them to be part of the process is so important to build their confidence and their self-esteem. And then the fine-tuning, if you like, can come once they've got that solid base. But if they're being humiliated right from the day one because they're being made to feel that they're not ever going to achieve anything like a degree of, self-respect in the target language, then if you've lost them, you've lost them, and then you're never going to regain them. So I think that's really, really, really important point. Thank you, Elsa.
Yeah,
Mickey, have you got any other questions there?
I'm just worried that we're coming close to time.
Sure.
We have a Discord channel, and I know we have more questions. Melissa asked a question which we never got to about assessments, about how you measure professional development in terms of academic success. Melissa, if you can put that question in the Discord channel, and please, we would love you guys to respond to the questions. Devanyas, you had a question as well. Please post it in the Discord channel, and we would like to continue this conversation. Also, I'd like to say that we have another session which Mickey will be part of on decolonizing English language on the 22nd. So I think we can perhaps continue that discussion to some extent. And thanks, Mickey, for putting your email in the chat. So please, I want to thank you all for this. This has been such a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time. I wish that my mistake saying we had 90 minutes was actually the truth, because we can continue this for another 30 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Please, we look forward to the next session on decolonizing English on the 22nd. We have another session on the next channel right now about how refugees can get employment. And again, language is so pivotal to education, to employment. So much of our being is linked to our language. And we have this view of English as being the predominant language, and you're often disadvantaged if you don't speak English in a particular way. So how can we deconstruct this, destroy these narratives, and sort of recognize that all Englishes are important and all Englishes are accepted? So thank you, everyone. Thank you for this fantastic conversation. Let's continue in the Discord channel.
Great. Thanks so much, Lorraine.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Lorraine.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Lorraine.
Yeah.